Last week we got through Amos and we got to the book of Hosea. I originally wanted to get through Hosea last week, but we didn't make it, which is okay. But we are in Hosea. How many of you guys have read the book of Hosea before? Yeah? Lots of people. What's the first thing you think of when you think of Hosea? Adultery. You know, for most people, that's the case. And because it's the primary mode in which God uses Hosea to pass his message along. But it's really not the main purpose of the book. The book is not about an adulterous woman. But that's what we think about because that's the method God uses to push his message. I too normally think of adultery when I think of Hosea and this adulterous relationship. Hosea is a prophet. He is native to the northern kingdom, preaching to the north before the north falls. And I'm told that it's very difficult to translate because it's very highly emotional and charged. So it's a difficult section to translate. A lot of poetics. A lot of the poetry in the Bible is really hard to translate. Some of that is just because we don't have words that translate real well. And some of it is just because any way you go, you're going to miss some of the messages. And the Bible's full of things like that. I was reading in Jonah just yesterday, and when it talks about there was a Gadol, God Gadol was a great fish that swallowed Jonah. Then later on, it's Gadah Gadol, which means a female fish, switches from male to female because those fish is now pregnant with Jonah. And there's things like that we just can't do in English, and they don't translate well. So some of the things in Hosea are kind of like that because there's a lot of your stuff in there is like that, just because of the poetic nature of this. Oops, I'm getting a buzz. All right, so, let's go to just Hosea chapter 1. Let's go ahead and just start there. We'll read a little bit. We're not going to read all of Hosea. We'll read a little bit. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, son of Beeri, during the reign of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. So we're going to see right off the bat, this is about the same time as Amos, about the same time as Isaiah. It's all about the same time period. And Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel. When the Lord first spoke to Hosea, he said to him, "Go and marry a woman of promiscuity." Good as any other word. I have children and have children of promiscuity, for the land is committed a blatant act of promiscuity in my land. So it says go to a woman of promiscuity, probably a prostitute, possibly a religious prostitute, but it doesn't necessarily say that. Some people have suggested that she might have been a prostitute for one of these false religions, sacred prostitute. But the Bible doesn't specifically say that, so we don't know. She was a woman of promiscuity. I guess she doesn't even have to be a prostitute. She could just be easygoing, I guess. Yeah, loose ways. But traditionally we call her a prostitute. And go and marry her, and the whole act of marriage and the children that will follow are all about Israel and its adulterous relationship to other gods. So as though we think about usually we see the physical side. That's usually the first thing that pops in our mind, but it really isn't about that. It's about how it's the allegory between God and Israel and its adulterous way, and so it's a warning that as Hosea represents God in here, and the woman of prostitute Gomer represents Israel. And it says this land is committing a blatant act of promiscuity by abandoning the Lord, by abandoning Yahweh. So he went and married Gomer, daughter of Dephalim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Actually, we're going to come back to that. There we go. Bore him a son, and the Lord said, name him Jezreel, for in a little while I will bring bloodshed of Jezreel on the house of Jehu. Now, Jezreel is a name that would automatically bring something to mind to the people that heard it. It would remind them of Jehu's bloody slaughter of the people at Jezreel. So he's naming them after this bloody battlefield. And so it would bring this automatically to mind. So he says, name your child, because if I'm God and Gomer's Israel, your child, I'm going to bring blood. There's going to be bloodshed on the house of Jehu, and put it into the kingdom of the house of Israel. I'm going to bring it to an end because you are in this adulterous relationship with these other gods. On that day, I will break the bow of Israel in Jezreel Valley. And she again conceived and gave birth to a daughter, and named her Lo-Ruhamah, for I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. Lo-Ruhamah means not to be pitied or not to have compassion upon. Which really seems really cruel to name your daughter. I'm not going to have compassion on you. I'm not going to pity you. But it's to say that I will no longer have compassion on the house of Israel. And he says, I will take it away. But I will have compassion on Judah, and I will deliver them by the Lord their God, and I will not deliver them by the bow or the sword or by war, a horse or the cavalry. So Lo-Ruhamah. Then after Gomer had weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived and gave birth to a son, and the Lord said, name him Lo-Ami, for you are not my people, which Lo-Ami means not my people, which probably is both a double entendre. This is not my son. She was a loose woman, and everyone knew it. And so this is probably a double entendre. This is not my kid, and he knew it. And it's also to say that Israel has been rejected by God. You are no longer my people because you are have been in this adulterous relationship. So people of God, which is interesting, because Israel means, people of God are not Lo-Ruhamah, not my people. So they're not my people now. And the Israelites will be like the sands on the sea, which cannot be measured and counted in the place. Every passage in Hosea, all the prophets, they don't have like this just fire and brimstone. They always end with these words of hope. You are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the Israelites will be like the sands on the sea, which cannot be measured and counted. And the place where you are told, you are not my people, they will call sons of the living God. And Judeans and Israel will be gathered together. They will appoint for themselves a single ruler and go up from the land, for the day of Jezreel will be great. So, pity will be shown in the end. Jezreel will be a place of blessing, not of curse. You will be my loved ones again. It says there will be a time that this is going to happen because you have rejected me. There's going to be a time where if you wouldn't have rejected me, then this wouldn't have come. The Assyrians would not have come down upon you. But because you did, then you're going to be rejected, but there's going to be a time out of it. There's going to be a recovering from this, and there's going to be that faithful remnant that will survive. And so there's words of hope in that even though you have to go through the valley of death, right, you will not fear, and that's hard for us to, in our individualistic minds, we like to think that, because look at all the people that will die from this. But in the end, the people will survive. And so, because it's not just about the person, it's about the people. The Bible is interesting like that because it is about the person and the people. It's not one or the other. It's both. Hosea 2. I don't know if I want to read all this, but call your brothers, my people, and your sisters, compassion. Rebuke your mothers, rebuke her, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. Let her remove the promiscuous look from her face and her adultery from between her breasts. Otherwise, I will strip her naked and expose her as she was on the day of her birth. I will make her like a desert and parched land, and I will let her die of thirst. I will have no compassion on her children because of the children of promiscuity. Yet her mother is promiscuous. She will conceive them and act shamefully, for she thought, I will follow my lovers, the men who gave me food and water, my wool and flax, oil and drink. Therefore I will do what I will do. I will block her with thorns. I will close her with a wall. She cannot find her path. She will pursue her lovers, but should not catch them. She will look for them, but not find them. She will think, I will go back to my former husband, for it was better for me than it is now. And she does not recognize that it is I who gave her the grain, the new wine, and the fresh oil. I lavished silver and gold on her, which they were used for Baal. So basically he's saying all this stuff that I gave her, she's accrediting to someone else. And that's what they're saying they're saying Israel was doing for God. They were saying that it was all these other gods that was permitting, but it was really God that was blessing them. And, we could go back to this in our own lives, right? Sometimes we give credit to other things, but it was really God blessing our lives. And we have to be careful where we give credit where credit is due. Of course, we give blame sometimes where blame isn't due, right? We say it's the devil when it was really just like our selfish desires or ourself or the world. It doesn't have to be the devil. Sometimes things just break. It's not demon-possessed. But this was going. So I gave them this, and. And she says that I'm going to bring her back. She's going to go back into the wilderness. Remember, and to say back into the wilderness, they would have automatically thought back to Exodus where they were in the wilderness before, not in their homelands. So he's speaking of the time that they're going to be disposed from their land and brought somewhere else, which does happen. We already talked about that it does happen. On that day, this Lord's declaration, you will call me my husband and no longer call me my Baal. For you remove the name Baals from her mouth, and they will no longer remember their names. Baal means Lord, but it can mean there's a Baal. There's like one Baal, but you can also say Baal and mean God. Kind of like in the Hebrew we have like the Elohim. It could mean God, the Yahweh, the Israelite God, or it could mean like the whole host of heaven, or it can mean God in literal G gods. And you can use the same thing with Baal. Baal is a generic term at times, and it's a name at times. Baal, Baal, but it is one of the names of one of the gods in the Canaanite religion. That was supposed to be struck out, but I remember this is the same Baals that was they killed the 450 prophets of Baal, and they're still worshiping them. It left for a while, it came back. So unfaithful wife, unfaithful people. But as she is so unfaithful, in Hosea 3 it says, "Then go again and show love to the woman who's loved by another man, and is she adulteress? Just as the Lord loves Israel, though they run to and turn to other gods, and they love raising cakes, so I brought her out 15 shekels of silver and 9 bushels of barley." So he says, go to her and buy her back. Now, interesting enough, when you're reading Hosea 3, this passage in Hosea 3 is actually written in the first person. The rest of it is not written in the first person. This one's written in the first person. I will go to her. I will do this. So it's as if Hosea writes this about his own actions, about going and buying her back. Probably really did have to go buy her back out. Which brides her back out for about the price of a slave, is what that means. That 15 shekels of silver and 9 bushels of barley. That's about what a slave would have cost at the time. So, yes. So chapter 4 through 14, verse 9, we will have this alternating between judgment and hope that will go throughout the rest of the book. And I'm not going to read all this. You guys can read. I know you guys can. At least most of you can. If you can't, you can listen to it online for free. But you'll have this alternating where there says the religious leaders are not faithful. You know, and this whole thing is kind of presented as a lawsuit by God against Israel, like in the courtroom setting. So this is actually more like, he's buying, part of the buying back process. It almost feels like he's going to court and bringing a lawsuit against. We're going to see another one of the prophets use a courtroom theme. Micah uses a courtroom theme to bring a lawsuit against the people. The religious leaders are not faithful to God. There's harlotry of the people. They follow after the Baals. Then the result of that harlotry is they can't find their way back to God. And it leads to an approaching war. They're going to see the aid from the world's powers instead of the Lord. And suffering, in the book of Hosea, it's suffering will hopefully bring you back to your senses and realize that God is bigger than all these other gods, and there is a true one that can help you out. There's going to be a false repentance. He's going to say, "As love like the morning mist," which means it's there in the morning and then goes away. Um, and he's going to say committed love is required. Anarchy, plots, counter plots, half-baked cakes. He's going to have this statement of half-baked cakes where they're, half-baked cake is unfit for consumption. He's going to say that, they're following after balls, not God. False worship, false friends, judgment and rejection by God. They're going to have increased altars, increased sin. It's going to end with wisdom sayings. If you follow God, and you can read through these. I'm not going to read through all these. Hosea 14:9. Let whoever is wise understand these things, and whoever is insightful recognize them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the righteous walk in them, but the rebellious stumble in them. This is kind of the idea that, if you're going to follow God, the righteous will remain, even though they're going to have to go through. Sometimes they're going to be taken off, and sometimes they're going to be killed, but the righteous will remain. And the faithful remnant is not explicitly stated in there, but it is implied that there will be people that remain. And after this courtroom scene. All right, I don't think we're going to go through any more of Hosea. Like I said, you guys can read that on your own. It's a judgment and hope, judgment and hope. Same basic idea through the whole thing. They're not being faithful. They're going to fall. The faithful will remain. But what I do want to do is I want to go back to this piece of paper, this king's list, your list of kings. I'm attached here. Stay. I was going to get to this. You've been here. Well, I have an extra one if you want it. Sometimes. All right, let's go ahead and look at the kings of Judah. We're going to go back in time. We went through all the kings of Israel. We talked about some of the prophets to Israel. We're going to go all the way back to when the kingdom divides, and we're in Judah. Now remember, Judah is which one? Which is it, north or south? South. Israel falls first. The north falls first. It's got the prime lands. It's got the the trade routes. Judah to the south lasts longer. Rehoboam will remain. Now, remember, who was Rehoboam? That's right, Solomon's son. Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and with the revolt in the north and Egypt in the south, which Judah is actually going to pay tribute to keep Egypt from coming in and conquering. Rehoboam is going to approach the people. I'm going to read from 1 Kings chapter 14, verses 21 through 29. That's 1 Kings 14. As soon as my Bible comes back up, because it just closed for some reason. 1 Kings 14, 29. 24 through 29, I guess it is. Like I said, going back in time. Just like Marty McFly. All right, starting in verse 21, I guess it is. Chapter 14, verse 21. Now Rehoboam, Solomon's son, reigned in Judah. Rehoboam was 41 years old when he became king. He reigned 17 years in Jerusalem, the city where the Lord had chosen for all the tribes of Israel to put his name. Rehoboam's mother's name was Nehemiah the Ammonite. Judah did what was evil in the Lord's sight. They provoked him to jealous anger more than any other ancestors had done with the sins they committed. They also built for themselves high places, sacred pillars, and Asherah poles on every high hill under every green tree. There was even a male cult prostitutes in the land. All right, so we got a lot of apostasy going here, a lot of false worship. You've got, says they built for themselves high places, so temples, high worship places where you did sacrifices on the hills. It says sacred pillars, another place for worship. Asherah poles, which were fertility poles, were worship of the goddess, the fertility goddess, on every high hill and every green trees. Green trees have something special in our minds when we think about the evergreens. We still use the evergreen to as worship items. The Christmas tree is a tree that we took in from Celtic practices that because of its never-endingness during the solstice. So that's where we got the Christmas tree from. So we have these, where we like the green trees represent the fertility even in the hard times. That's why a lot of the evergreens are special to us in many religions. They even had male cult prostitutes. So they had female cult prostitutes and even male cult prostitutes. So prostitutes of every gender that you could go sleep with in order to have more fertility. So it was part of the sex worship of the time period. We forget how much sex was part of the worship in the ancient days and really still is in our lives. We just don't call it worship. But people worship through sex all the time. Otherwise it wouldn't be on every commercial and every TV show and every, all over the internet, and because that's part of worship. See, they imitated all the despicable practices of the nations the Lord had disposed before Israel. So they were doing everything the nations around them were doing. In the 5th year of the king Rehoboam, King Shishka of Egypt went to war against Jerusalem. He seized the treasures of the Lord's temple and the treasury of the royal place. He took everything. He took the golden shields that Solomon had made. King Rehoboam made bronze shields to replace them and committed them to the care of the captain of the guard who protected the entrance to the king's palace. Whenever the king entered the Lord's temple, the guard would carry the shields. Then they would take them back to the armory. The rest of the events of Rehoboam's reigns, along with all of his accomplishments, are written on the historical record of Judah's kings. So basically, I know, the other records of Judah's kings are kind of lost to us. Some people say we found them, and some people say that's not the true ones, and I'm not getting into that debate. They're not in the scriptures. But they're guilty of all this religious apostasy and turning towards other gods. And that was under Solomon's son, who decided to make the yoke heavier, right? led to civil war, and then he started worshiping false gods. Probably his family, his mother. I remember a lot of Solomon's wives were from other religions, and they started letting them worship the other gods in the land. Following him was Abijah. My father is Yahweh, is basically what that means. In the 18th year of Israel, King Jeroboam, son of Nebat, became king over Judah and reigned for years at Jerusalem. His mother's name was. He'll reign for 3 years. And he continues the war of Jeroboam. As we read it, it seems that God is only gracious to him because he was a descendant of David. Following him was, which one are we on? Asa, brother of Abijah. Asa is going to reign for 41 years, which is often a reign that signifies, a long reign usually signifies God's favor. Asa will be responsible for trying to abolish the pagan worship out of the land. So he's going to do a lot of things to bring back worship back to Yahweh and try to get rid of all the false religions. With the aid of Ben-Hadad of Syria, he's actually going to turn back Bashan's advance as they were being attacked. If you remember back when we talked about that. So he was seen as a good king. Jehoshaphat in 1 Kings 22 became the son of Asa, became king over Judah. Now usually the sons of kings don't do that well, but Jehoshaphat seems to be a good king. He reigns for 25 years. He makes peace with Israel. He roots up corrupt religious practices, takes control of Edom, tries to establish a merchant fleet, building up trade, has an alliance with Ahab in a battle against Ramoth Gilead. So he's considered a good king, and he does a lot. Already we're seeing something that Israel never had. Good kings that follow after the Lord. It's no wonder they last longer. You look at that sheet I have has little thumbs up and thumbs down and thumbs sideways. Israel, they're all thumbs down, aren't they? Judah has some that are thumbs up. And that in the Bible is why they last longer. Because remember, it's all about God and His people and His interaction with people. It's not a straight up history. It's God moving through His people. And so the reason they last longer is because they have kings that follow God. Jehoram, married Ahab's daughter, and that's about it. He dies just before the Jehud purge. Ahaziah, who will take his place, and he's killed by Jehu while visiting Joram. He's only going to reign for a year. Israel's kings that were wicked are going to be killing off even Judah's kings. Then next we have an interesting one. Athaliah. Why is this interesting? That's right, it's a female. When Athaliah, Ahaziah's mother, saw that her son was dead, she took the throne. This is the only woman to reign as ruler over Judah or Israel. And she will start a purge of the royal family, killing off anyone who might take her place as queen. So she does not seems to be in the right. I don't remember what thumb that one has on it. I think it's down. Or is it sideways? Is it down? Atalaya. I know there's a part I wanted to read. Yes. Jehoiada brought out the king's son and put the crown on him and gave him this testimony and made him king. They anointed him and clapped their hands and cried, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard the noise from the guard in the crowd, she went out to the people at the Lord's temple. She looked, and there was a king standing by the pillar according to the custom. The commander and the trumpeters were by the king, and all the people of the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. Athaliah tore her clothes and screamed, "Treason, treason!" Then the priest Jehoiada ordered the commanders of hunters in charge of the army, "Take her out between the ranks and put to death by the sword anyone who follows her." For the priest had said, "She is not to be put to death in the Lord's temple." So they arrested her, and she went through the horse entrance to the king's palace, where she was put to death. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the people, and they would be the Lord's people, and another covenant between the king and the people. So all the people of the land went to the temple of Baal and tore it down, and they smashed the altars into the image of the pieces, and they killed the priest of Baal. And so she was an evil queen, worshipped the false gods. They overthrew her. Jehoiada leads a coup, making Joash the king. Joiada is the chief priest. Joash is an interesting. He's found in 2 Kings chapter 12. He's a boy king. Jehoiada is probably the one pulling all the real strings. So he's the king, but the chief priest is actually the one probably doing the ruling. And that's one of the reasons we see the return back to Yahweh, is because the chief priest of Yahweh is calling the shots. And but even after all that, we're going to see that his reign is actually really peaceful. It says he did what's right in the eyes of the Lord. He uses the temple money to repair. He uses temple money, repair money to bribe the king of Aram. Jehoiash actually will be assassinated. I'm sorry, Joash. But it will be a sign of stability of Judah that because it follows the Davidic line, that even with a coup and an assassination, they're going to stay relatively stable, because it's not like Israel where you just, have someone appoint you as king and kill off your and you become king and you just keep killing people. They will continue to follow the line of David. So it's always someone from the line of David that takes the place. So it'll give a relatively stable government. And so you don't have that quick recession of, remember when we were studying Israel's kings and they just kept killing off and killing off and killing off and killing off? You can't do that if you're going to follow the line of Judah, of David. Because you have to have that line, that you have to have those people to take the place, which is really amazing, really goes to a much stabler government. I'm not going to read this part. In 2 Kings 14, we see, I'm probably going to mispronounce this one. I can never get this one right. Amaziah. He's going to lead in capture of Joash's army. But not really do anything. I mean, there's a whole chapter that really doesn't, go anywhere. Uzziah, the next king, is actually going to be one of the most important kings to follow after that. Uzziah is in 2 Kings 15. And if you're reading the Chronicler, or Book of Chronicles, you're going to see his name as Azariah, which is Uzziah in same, just different spelling of the same tradition. It says, in the 27th year of Israel's king Jeroboam, Azariah, son of Amaziah, became king of Judah. He was 16-year-old when he became king. He reigned 52 years in Jerusalem. Yeah, so he's going to be seen as a time that follows God. He's going to lead Judah in a period of great prosperity. Really short in the Kings. I mean, it's only 7 verses in the Kings that talks about Uzziah. He says, Asa did what was right in the Lord, just as his father Amaziah had done. Yet the high places were not taken away. The people continued sacrificing and burning incense to the high places. The Lord afflicted the king, and he had a serious skin disease until the day he died. He lived quarantined while Jotham and the king's son was over the household governing the people of the land, and the rest of Ahaziah's reign, along with its accomplishments, are written in the historical record of the king of Judah. We have more about him in the Chronicles, and we also know quite a bit about him because he's also one of the kings when Isaiah comes to prophecy. So we're going to see some correlation there. But in the Chronicler, we see that he conquers Philistine territories and reestablishes control of coastal highways, so they gain trade routes. He pushes back others out of Judah all the way to Egypt. He fortifies Jerusalem and major key areas. He promotes agriculture. He modernizes the army. His downfall is listed as his pride. He's going to actually presume on the priest role and become a leopard, which is, while he remains king, his son Jotham will reign regent until his death. So Jotham only reigns for a while, and then he reigns before he becomes actually king. Ahaz, or Jehoahaz, same person. He will not do what is right in the Lord, eyes of the Lord, and lead into false worship. When threatened by Israel and Syria, he becomes a vassal of Assyria. So this is when he's going to fall, become the vassal. One of the things that Ahaz is going to do that's really going to make people infuriated is he's going to change the temple in accordance to the king of Assyria's wishes. He's going to let the temple of Yahweh be changed so that it matches up with the Assyrian king's wishes, so that they don't get destroyed. we've gone through a lot really quickly. I think we're going to stop there. We're going to pick up with Isaiah, the prophet to Judah, next week. No point in stopping it with 10 minutes to go. Starting that. Do we have any questions about all those kings that sets up Isaiah? You guys are great. I'm going to push through that. I know that was a little tough, but there are some great books out there on all these kings. I have a couple of them, but most of these kings we don't know much about because they're not found anywhere other than the Bible and maybe a few lines where they had trade relationships with someone else. So we don't know a lot about them. But the main part is either they did what was right in the eyes of the Lord or they didn't. And not leads to the destruction and the downfall, which is where Isaiah will be stepping in next week. Anything else we need to say? Oh yeah, they do. Athaliah was going to kill Joash, and they hide him so that he can't be, so that he can replace and become the boy king. All right. Well, let's go ahead and close in prayer. Yahweh Adonai, Lord God, we praise you today, Lord. We thank you for this wonderful blessing. Lord, we pray that you just give us your peace and your strength. Help us to be a people after your own heart and study the scriptures and study it truthfully. We love you, Lord, and we want to be true to your word. We know that we don't need to rewrite the Bible. We just need to reread it. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.